December 20th, 2024, the Federal Reserve releases its latest money supply data. M2, the broadest measure of money in circulation, stands at 21.2 trillion. For context, in January 2020, before CO, M2 was 15.4 trillion. In less than 5 years, the United States created 5.8 trillion in new money, and that's a 38% increase in the money supply in under 5 years. To put that in perspective, the entire US money supply in 1980 was 1.66 trillion. We printed 3.6 times the entire 1980 economy in just 5 years. But here's what nobody's telling you. The inflation hasn't hit yet. Not the real inflation, what we experienced in 2021-2023, the 9% official inflation, the 20% real inflation in groceries and rent. That was just the preview. The main event is coming because 5.8 trillion doesn't just disappear into the economy overnight, it moves in waves. The first wave hit asset prices, stocks up 60% since 2020, housing up 47%. The second wave hit consumer prices, groceries, gas, rent. The third wave, the one that destroys the middle class, is still building. And it's not just the $5.8 trillion we already printed, it's the 90 trillion we're going to print over the next 15 years to service the debt we created. Printing the first 5.8 trillion, this is the debt inflation spiral. And once it starts, it doesn't stop until the currency is destroyed and the middle class is annihilated. Here's what nobody in government will tell you. There is no path to paying the 36 trillion national debt. None. The math doesn't work. The only way out is inflation. Massive sustained middle class destroying inflation that will transfer 20-30 trillion in wealth from savers and wage earners to asset holders in the government over the next decade. This isn't speculation. This is pattern recognition. This is what happens every single time a government prints money to finance debt it cannot repay. Rome did it, Weimar Germany did it, Nixon did it in slow motion, and America is doing it right now faster than any of them. Here's the complete four-stage pattern of currency collapse. The three historical examples that prove it's inevitable. The exact timeline showing where we are in the cycle. The math proving the government has no choice but to inflate and who gets destroyed versus who consolidates wealth when the currency crisis hits. Because this isn't about economics, this is about survival. And if you don't understand what's coming, you'll be on the wrong side of the largest wealth transfer in American history. The four-stage pattern of currency collapse. Every currency collapse in history follows the same four stages, no exceptions in 2000 years. Stage 1, the foundation. A nation establishes a trusted currency backed by something real. Gold, silver, commodities. The backing creates trust. The trust creates economic expansion. People save in the currency because it holds value. The stage lasts decades or centuries. Stage 2, debasement begins. The government faces mounting costs. Wars, welfare programs, imperial overreach, corrupt payments to maintain power. Tax revenue isn't enough. Borrowing has limits, so the government does what desperate governments always do. They debase the currency, they reduce the precious metal content, they print more paper, they promise it's temporary, they promise nothing has changed. Stage 3, loss of control. The debasement accelerates, inflation rises, currency collapses, and here's the critical part. The middle class holding wealth in the currency gets obliterated. Meanwhile, those closest to money creation, the elites, the landowners, the politically connected, they survive. They consolidate. They buy assets from desperate sellers at fire sale prices. Stage 4, the reset. A new currency is introduced, wealth has transferred from millions to thousands. The system restarts and the people who lost everything never see it coming because each stage blends into the next. Let me prove this pattern with three civilizations spanning 2000 years. Historical example, Rome 64 AD to 270 AD. 64 AD, Rome is burning. Emperor Nero needs money desperately. The denarius, Rome's silver coin, had contained 95% pure silver under Augustus. Nero reduced it to 80% purity. That was stage 2 beginning. Most Romans didn't notice the coin looked the same. It spent the same, but it contained 15% less silver. Nero minted more coins with less silver. More money in circulation, same goods available, prices started rising. 130 years later, under Emperor Septimius Severus, that same denarius contained just 46% silver. Half silver, half base metal. Then came Caracalla. In 215 AD, he introduced the Antoninianus, supposedly worth 2 denarii but containing only 1.5 times the silver. Monetary fraud at civilizational scale. By 253 AD, under Emperor Gallienus, the Antoninianus contained 20% silver. A decade later, 2%. 2% silver in what was once the most trusted currency on earth. What happened to prices? They exploded 1000% over 100 years. A measure of wheat that cost 200 denarii in 150 AD cost 100,000 denarii by 250 AD. Who lost? The Roman middle class, small landholders, merchants, soldiers on fixed salaries. Anyone holding denarii as savings saw their wealth evaporate. A merchant who saved 100,000 denarii over his lifetime, enough to buy a farm, watched it become enough to buy a loaf of bread. Who won? Large landowners, senators with estates, anyone holding physical assets, land, buildings, livestock. These assets appreciated into debased currency terms. A farm worth 100,000 denarii in 150 AD was worth 100 million denarii in 250 AD. The land didn't change, the currency did. The result, wealth consolidated to the senatorial class. The middle class was annihilated. By 300 AD, Rome had transitioned from a republic with a broad middle class to an oligarchy where a few hundred families owned most of the empire's wealth. The debasement destroyed the social foundation of Rome, and within 200 years, the Western Roman Empire collapsed. Check the 4 stages. Stage 1, trusted silver currency established under Augustus. Stage 2, 200 plus years of gradual debasement to fund wars and imperial overreach. Stage 3, hyperdebasement and 1000% inflation, middle class destroyed. Stage 4, currency reform under Diocletian. Wealth concentrated to elite, empire weakened beyond repair, pattern complete. Weimar Germany 1921 to 1923. After World War I, Germany owed 132 billion gold marks in reparations, equivalent to 442 billion today. Germany had abandoned the gold standard during the war. Now they had to pay in gold-backed currency while possessing almost none. The Weimar government made a choice. Instead of raising taxes or cutting spending, both politically impossible, they printed money. Watch how fast this accelerates. January 1919, 8.9 marks per US dollar, normal post-war level. July 1922, 493 marks per dollar. January 1923, 17,972 marks per dollar. France occupies the Ruhr. August 1923, 4.6 million marks per dollar. November 1923, 4.2 trillion marks per dollar. 4.2 trillion marks per dollar. A loaf of bread that cost 160 marks at the end of 1922 cost 200 billion marks in November 1923. Families who saved for generations watched their entire fortunes evaporate in months. A middle-class family with 100,000 marks in savings in 1922, enough for 5 years of comfortable living, couldn't buy a postage stamp by December 1923. But anyone holding real assets survived. Farmers owned land that produced food. Factory owners owned buildings and machines. Anyone who had borrowed money in marks saw their debt inflated away. You borrowed 100,000 marks in 1921 to buy a house. By 1923, you owed 100,000 marks, which equaled 1/1,000,000th of a loaf of bread. Your debt was gone, your house was yours, free and clear. The hyperinflation completed the largest wealth transfer in German history from middle-class savers to asset holders and debtors. Who lost? Teachers, civil servants, pensioners, anyone on fixed income or holding cash savings. The professional middle class was annihilated. Who won? Industrialists like Hugo Stinnes, who borrowed heavily to buy assets during the inflation, then repaid the loans with worthless marks. Large landowners, speculators who understood what was happening. The psychological trauma defined German politics for the next decade. The middle class felt betrayed. They had saved, followed the rules, trusted the government. They were destroyed. And a failed artist named Adolf Hitler built a political movement on their rage. Apply the pattern. Stage 1, gold-backed mark pre-WWI. Stage 2, currency expansion during WWI and printing to pay reparations. 1921-1923. Stage 3, 209,500% monthly inflation in October 1923, total middle class destruction. Stage 4, introduction of the rent mark. In November 1923, wealth consolidated. Hitler rises to power within 10 years. Pattern repeating, undeniable. Nixon and the dollar, 1971 to present. August 15th, 1971, President Nixon appears on television and suspends dollar convertibility into gold. The Nixon shock. For 27 years since Bretton Woods in 1944, the dollar had been pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. Every other currency was pegged to the dollar. This was the foundation of the global financial system. But by 1971, America was hemorrhaging gold. Foreign governments were demanding redemption. The US held only 10,000 metric tons of gold left, less than half its peak reserves. On August 11th, 1971, Britain requested $3 billion in gold moved from Fort Knox. Nixon couldn't comply without exposing that the US didn't have enough gold. On August 15th, he closed the gold window. The dollar became pure fiat currency overnight. Within 15 months, Bretton Woods collapsed entirely. The dollar floated against other currencies, and America discovered it could print unlimited money without gold backing, constraining the supply. What happened next? Inflation. The 1970s delivered stagflation. Unemployment hit 6%. Inflation soared to 13.5% by 1980. Those holding dollars watched purchasing power evaporate. But those holding assets flourished. Real estate soared. Gold went from 35 ounce in 1971 to 850 ounce in 1980, a 24 increase in 9 years. Stocks recovered after the initial shock. Anyone who bought real estate, commodities, or equities during the 1970s built generational wealth. The wealth gap began widening systematically. In 1971, the top 1% held 23% of wealth. By 1990, 30%. By 2024, 32%. The shift from gold-backed money to pure fiat enabled unlimited money printing, which disproportionately benefits asset holders. Check the pattern. Stage 1, gold-backed dollar established under Bretton Woods 1944. Stage 2, decades of deficit spending and monetary expansion drain gold reserves, forced debasement 1971. Stage 3, 1970s inflation destroys savings. Wealth gap widens. Stage 4, we're living in it now. Fiat currency system, wealth inequality at all-time highs. We're in stage 3, transitioning to stage 4, and the acceleration is about to begin. The current crisis, America 2024, stage 3, accelerating. Let me show you where America is right now in the 4-stage pattern. Stage 1 complete. America established the gold-backed dollar as world reserve currency 1944. Verified. Stage 2 complete. Decades of deficit spending and monetary expansion, gold window closed. 1971, pure fiat currency unleashed. National debt grew from $398 billion in 1971 to $36.2 trillion December 2024. 91 WX increase in 53 years. Verified. Stage 3 in progress. Currency devaluation accelerating. Wealth concentration intensifying. Let me show you the current numbers. M2 money supply. December 2024, 21.2 trillion. January 2020, 15.4 trillion increase. $5.88 trillion in under 5 years. That's 38% expansion. But it's not just about what we've already printed, it's about what we have to print going forward. National debt December 2024, 36.2 trillion. Annual deficit 2024, 1.9 trillion. Projected deficit 2025, $2.1 trillion. Interest payments on the debt, 1.13 trillion in fiscal year 2024. That's $130,000 in interest alone. For context, that's more than the entire defense budget, $880 billion. Here's where the death spiral begins. Interest payments are now the second largest federal expenditure after Social Security. And as debt grows, interest payments grow. And interest payments add to the deficit, which adds to the debt, which increases interest payments. The Congressional Budget Office projects that by 2034, interest payments will hit $1.7 trillion annually. By 2040, $2.4 trillion, that's assuming interest rates average 3.5%. But current 10-year Treasury rates are 4.4%. If rates stay at 4.4%, interest payments hit $2 trillion by 2030 and $3 trillion by 2035. Now, here's the trap. Total federal revenue in 2024 was $4.9 trillion. Total federal spending was $6.8 trillion. Mandatory spending. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest was $4.2 trillion. By 2034, CBO projects mandatory spending will be $6.5 trillion. That's more than total revenue today. There will be nothing left for defense, education, infrastructure, veterans, nothing. Just mandatory payments. The government has three options. Option 1, cut spending. Impossible politically. You'd have to cut Social Security and Medicare, which are untouchable. Even if you eliminated the entire defense budget, all discretionary spending, everything except mandatory programs, you still run a deficit because interest payments keep growing. Option 2, raise taxes. You'd need to raise taxes by 40% across the board to balance the budget. That means the average family making $75,000 is paying $9,000 more per year in taxes. Political suicide won't happen. Option 3, print money. This is the only option. The Federal Reserve will buy treasury bonds by creating new money. This is debt monetization. This is how you get inflation, and we're already doing it. The Fed's balance sheet, which peaked at $9 trillion in 2022, is currently $7.4 trillion. The Fed claims it's reducing its balance sheet, but the Fed still holds $4.8 trillion in treasuries. As deficits grow and foreign buyers reduce treasury purchases, China down $350 billion from peak, Japan down $180 billion, the Fed will have to increase purchases. This means printing money to buy government debt. That's the inflation mechanism, and it's not hypothetical. It's happening right now. It's a coming inflation timeline. Let me show you the timeline of how this plays out. 2020-2024. The setup. 5.8 trillion in new money printed. First wave hits asset prices, stocks, housing up 4 to 6%. Second wave hits consumer prices. Official CPI 20%, cumulative real inflation 30-40% in essentials. This was the preview. 2025 to 2027 deficit explosion. Annual deficits exceed $2 trillion consistently. Interest payments approach $1.5 trillion. Foreign treasury buying continues declining. Fed forced to increase treasury purchases from $200 billion annually to $500 billion annually. M2 money supply grows 2 trillion from 21 trillion to 23 trillion by end of 2027. 2028-2030, the acceleration, interest payments hit $2 trillion annually. This equals 40% of tax revenue going just to interest. Deficits hit 2.53 trillion, Fed buying 800 billion in treasuries annually. M2 hits 26 trillion by 2030. Cumulative money supply growth since 2020, 69%. Real inflation, not CPI, averaging 8 to 10 to 12% annually. Wages grow 3 to 4%. Middle class loses 5 to 8% purchasing power annually. 2031-2033, the crisis point. Social Security Trust Fund depletes 2033, benefits automatically cut 21% unless Congress acts. Congress won't cut benefits before an election, so they'll fix it by printing money to cover shortfall. Medicare Trust Fund depletes 2028 to 2031 depending on usage. Same solution, print money. Combined, these require 500 billion pluses in additional annual spending with no corresponding revenue. Fed buying $1.5 trillion in treasuries annually. M2 approaching $30 trillion, real inflation $12 to 18% annually. 2034-2040, the destruction. Interest payments consume 50% plus of tax revenue. Fed owns 40% plus of all treasuries outstanding. Dollar loses significant reserve currency status as other nations flee treasury holdings. Inflation persistent at 10-15% annually. Cumulative inflation since 2020, 300-400%. A house that cost $400,000 in 2020 costs $1.6 million in 2040. Wages haven't kept up. Middle class with median $200,000 net worth in 2020 has lost 60% in real purchasing power. This isn't prediction. This is math. The debt requires interest payments that exceed revenue growth. The only way to pay is printing money. Printing money causes inflation. Inflation requires more money printing to service the debt. It's a spiral that doesn't stop until either the debt is restructured, default, or inflated away. Currency destruction, who gets destroyed versus who consolidates. Let me show you exactly who loses and who wins when the inflation hits. The destroyed middle-class wage earners and savers. The median American household has $200,000 in net worth as of 2024. The composition 65% in home equity. When real inflation runs 10% annually for 10 years, assets lose purchasing power at different rates. Your house appreciates nominally from $400,000 to $700,000 by 2034. But real purchasing power, accounting for inflation, is only $270,000 in 2024. You haven't gained wealth. You've lost 33% in real terms. Your retirement account normally grows from $200,000 to $350,000 by 2034 at 7% annual returns, but real purchasing power is $135,000 in 2024. You've lost 33% in real terms. Your wages grow from $75,000 to $110,000 by 2034 at 3% annual raises, but real purchasing power is $42,000 in 2024. You've lost 44% in real income. Your total net worth normally grows from $200,000 to $360,000, but real purchasing power is $138,000 2024. You've lost 31% of your wealth while thinking you're getting richer because the numbers are bigger. This is the inflation trap. Nominal numbers rise, real purchasing power falls, and most people don't understand the difference until they try to retire and realize that $350,000 in retirement savings buys what $135,000 bought 10 years earlier. Who specifically gets destroyed? Retirees on fixed pensions, savers in cash or bonds. $100,000 in a savings account or treasury bonds loses 60% of purchasing power in 10 years. Young workers starting salary $50,000 in 2024 is worth $19,000 in real terms by 2034. You can't save for a house because your income does not keep up with asset price inflation. Public sector workers, government employees with wage caps see real income fall 40 to 50%. The middle class, broadly defined as households with $50,000 to $200,000 in income, will be effectively impoverished by sustained 10% real inflation over a decade. The consolidators, asset holders, and debt holders. Now let me show you who wins. The top 1% of households have median net worth of 11.6 million as of 2024. The composition 80% in stocks and real estate, 15% in business equity, 5% in bonds and cash. Their stocks appreciate with inflation. The S&P 500 tracks nominal GDP growth. If nominal GDP grows 12% annually, 3% real plus 9% inflation, stocks grow similarly. 5 million in stocks becomes 15.5 million in 10 years. Nominally, real purchasing power 6 million in 2024. They gained wealth. Their real estate appreciates with inflation. 3 million in real estate becomes 7.8 million nominally. Real purchasing power, $3 million no loss, but hedged against inflation. Their business equity grows with inflation as revenues increase nominally. Additionally, if they hold debt, inflation destroys it. A $2 million mortgage in 2024 still requires $2 million payoff in 2034, but the real burden is only $770,000 in 2024. Their debt evaporated. Who specifically consolidates wealth? Large asset holders, anyone with $5+ million in stocks and real estate sees wealth preserved or grow in real terms. Corporations with pricing power, companies that can raise prices faster than costs rise, make windfall profits. Think Apple, Microsoft, oil companies, real estate investors. Anyone who owns rental properties, raises rents with inflation, collects income and inflates away mortgage debt. The government itself. The 36 trillion in 2024 becomes effectively 14 trillion in 2034. Real terms after 10 years of 10% inflation, the debt disappears through currency debasement. This is the transfer mechanism. Inflation transfers wealth from those holding cash, wages, and bonds to those holding stocks, real estate, and debt. From the many to the few, from the middle class to the 1%. The math is inevitable. Let me show you why this is mathematically inevitable. Total US debt, government plus household plus corporate, $90 trillion as of December 2024. Annual GDP, $28 trillion, debt to GDP ratio 321%, historical pattern. When debt to GDP exceeds 250%, countries either default or inflate. The US won't default. Political suicide, global economic collapse, so will inflate. To reduce debt to GDP from 321% to 150% sustainable level, you either increase GDP while holding debt constant. Impossible. Debt grows 2 trillion annually, pay down debt faster than GDP grows. Impossible. Requires $3+ trillion annual surpluses. Inflate nominal GDP while real debt shrinks through inflation. Option 3 is the only path. If you run 10% inflation for 10 years while holding real GDP constant at 2% growth, nominal GDP grows from 28 trillion to 73 trillion. If debt grows nominally from 90 trillion to 130 trillion, adding $4 trillion annually, debt to GDP falls from 321% to 178%. You've solved the debt crisis through inflation, but you've destroyed the middle class in the process. This is the choice. Default and cause immediate catastrophic collapse, or inflate over 10-15 years and cause slow motion catastrophic collapse. The government will choose inflation. Every government in history with this choice has chosen inflation because inflation is politically survivable. Voters don't understand it, while default is not immediate crisis. Stage 4. The reset. What comes after the inflation? History shows 3 possibilities. Possibility 1. Currency replacement. The dollar loses reserve status. A new currency, possibly gold-backed, SDR-based or BRICS currency, replaces it for international trade. The dollar remains domestic but at sharply reduced value. This is the soft landing scenario, but it still means Americans lose 50 to 70% of purchasing power permanently. Possibility 2. Hyperinflation. If the Fed loses control during the 2028-2033 crisis period, inflation could accelerate from 10% to 20% to 40% to Weimar levels. This destroys the currency completely and requires a new dollar introduction. This is the hard crash scenario. Possibility 3. Financial repression. The government imposes capital controls, forces pension funds and banks to buy treasuries at artificially low rates, and caps price increases on essentials. This is slow confiscation. Savers lose through negative real interest rates. This is the authoritarian scenario, most likely a combination. Sustained high inflation, 8 to 15% annually for 10-15 years, reduces debt burden while destroying middle-class savings. Currency partially loses reserve status. Government implements some capital controls. Dollar survives but at 30-40% of current purchasing power by 2040. The reset will be complete by 2040. Wealth will have transferred. The middle class holding $200,000 median net worth in 2024 will have $140,000 in real purchasing power. The top 1% holding 11.6 million will have 12 to 15 million in real terms. They'll grow wealth through inflation. The pattern completes. Millions lose. Thousands consolidate. The currency resets. History repeats. Right now, December 2025, we're at the inflection point. The 5.8 trillion already. Trillion dollars printed is working through the system. The 90 trillion incoming inflation over 15 years is the mathematical consequence of debt that cannot be repaid except through currency debasement. The middle class is about to be destroyed, not through a single crash but through sustained inflation that erodes purchasing power 5 to 10% annually for a decade. You'll watch your salary rise and still feel poorer every year. You will watch your house price double and realize you can't afford to move because new houses tripled. The pattern has repeated for 2,000 years. Rome debased for 200 years and destroyed its middle class. Weimar printed for 2 years and annihilated savers. Nixon closed the gold window in 1971 and unleashed 53 years of slow-motion debasement that is now accelerating into crisis. And America is following the exact same script. Stage 1 complete, Stage 2 complete, Stage 3 in progress, Stage 4 approaching. If this showed you that the $90 trillion incoming inflation is mathematically inevitable, If you understand the four-stage pattern that's destroyed every currency in history, if you see that the middle class is about to be annihilated while asset holders consolidate wealth, subscribe because the next video shows you the three specific actions you can take right now to position yourself on the right side of the wealth transfer. How to convert vulnerable assets into inflation-protected assets. How to use debt strategically the way the 1% does. And why the next 3 years, 2025-2027, are the last window to prepare before the acceleration makes it too late. The 90 trillion inflation isn't coming. It's already here. The first 5.8 trillion was printed, the next 15 trillion will print by 2030, and by 2040 will have inflated away 90 trillion in real debt burden by destroying the currency and the middle class with it. The pattern doesn't lie, the math doesn't lie, and the middle class holding cash and wages always gets destroyed. Unpayable debt never gets paid, it gets inflated away. And you're holding the currency that's about to be sacrificed to pay the debt.